And the last one, and this is the hardest one, I think. Forgiveness does not mean you didn't do wrong too. Right? Wounds rarely end up one-way streets, especially as we get older. And even if we have things that our dads need to own, or others, again, other significant people need to own, it doesn't mean we don't have things we got to own too. And in fact, this is a step towards us. When we forgive others, it now helps God take that spotlight and go, and what about you, right? But we'll get that in a second, right? So forgiveness isn't all those things. What does it look like to forgive our dads? This is simple, but it's not easy. Forgiving dad means you release him and his answers to his core questions to the true father, right? It's just saying, look, I'm no longer going to look to my dad to tell me those things. I'm not going to try to bargain to get value from dad. I'm not going to try to trade some behavior to get some, pittance of identity or value or worth from dad. I want to say that even if your dad was able to give you everything he had, it still wouldn't have been enough. You realize that? Even if you had the best dad in the world, and he gave you everything he possibly could give you, it still wouldn't be enough. You know why? There's only one true father. There's only one true father. There's only one person that knows you enough to give you what your heart needs. And so forgiving dad only occurs when you've allowed him to own his actions, and then you've released him with no strings attached. You say, look, you are another hurt, wounded human. Again, now understanding what forgiveness is, it doesn't mean what he did didn't matter. Doesn't mean what he did didn't hurt. Doesn't all those things we just talked about, right? It's saying, I know all those things are true, and I'm still going to release you. I'm still going to forgive you. And when we're doing that, when we let those God-sized expectations roll off our dad's shoulders, we can begin to see them for the human they were, the flawed, the failed human they were. As I've started to do this with my dad, I started to then be able to step into his story. What happened to him? Because now I'm no longer having to look to him to get that value and that identity, and I've let him own he failed. Now I can go, how did he get set up that way, right? What happened in his life? And I began to understand my dad. I wasn't making excuses any longer because he did mess up, right? But then I started to find that, wow, my dad's mother died when he was 5. Wow. My dad's dad died when he was 17. My dad cared for his dad, my grandfather, that I never met, for the last 2 years of his life because he had a stroke. Wow, didn't know that about my dad. My dad grew up on a family farm that was poor, and my dad was overweight my entire life, and so he wasn't active and stuff like that, and that always was a pain point because we never really did anything together. Well, then I found out when my dad was growing up on the farm, they didn't have a lot of food, and in his family, the older siblings were the ones that did the work on the farm, and so they got to eat first. So my dad and his youngest sister were not allowed to come to the dinner table until everyone else had eaten. And so they got to come and eat whatever was left. And so what do you learn when you are the last one or the last two that get to come to the dinner table? You get everything you can get, right? You eat while the getting's good, right? So my dad learned at a young age, I better eat when I can eat. Well, when he's older and he has food, guess what he doesn't unlearn? I eat when I can eat. So my dad just ate and ate and ate, and that's how he dealt with his pain, right? So you start to, it unhooks you to be able to start to understand the stories and understand that's how they got where they got. And God starts to, again, help develop compassion for them and understanding of them. And I know that's happened with Jan too, understanding her mom's story. Doesn't excuse, right? Remember all those things forgiveness isn't. Doesn't mean her mom didn't hurt her, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. But as you can forgive them, you can now start to see, where did they come from? How did that happen? How did that person get from little girl to bitter older woman? And it allows God to start to redeem your pain for good. God can start to take this story and start to redeem it, right? But releasing our dads especially and releasing others is not quick. William Young said, "You may have to declare your forgiveness 100 times the first day and the second day, but the third day will be less, and each day after, until one day you realize you've completely forgiven them. And then one day you will pray for their wholeness." But I think this is part of the journey, I think, that's so valuable. And this verse in Malachi, I think, is the promise, right? God will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. Yes. Even if your father is gone, like mine was. I understand my dad more today than I ever did, and I love him more today than I ever have, despite his mistakes, because he was a human. Because I've let him own it. Now, I know there's areas that I say that today, and God's going, yeah, just wait, in a year I'm going to, But as far as I know, with where God has taken me, He's allowed me to forgive my dad. It's allowed me to begin to love my dad. Not because he's my source, but because he's my dad. Flawed, man of clay, with some veins of gold, right? So then, as we talk to the last couple steps here, forgiveness makes you face your own failings. So when you forgive others, now you're kind of without excuse. And so the next step in reversing that fatherless cycle is going from depression to recognizing and owning your cooperation with the fatherless cycle. Because guess what? We've cooperated. We're all adults in here. At some point, we've gone beyond I was a child, I was responding to what happened to me, right? And now at some point, I'm cooperating with what's happened to me, right? I'm choosing to be bitter. I'm choosing to not forgive. I'm choosing to, right? We start cooperating at some level. There's a saying, they say when you forgive another, you release the prisoner, and that prisoner is you, which is true. But living for years as a prisoner means you've got years of unlearning to do, as well as your own crimes where you have to turn and face. See, requiring your dad to take responsibility for his part does not absolve you from you having to take responsibility for the parts that you have cooperated over time. And I talked through my story about how my childhood, I get into my teen years, which were very tumultuous for me. And I put on a lot of different faces for different people. And at some point, though, that stopped becoming a survival technique, and it started becoming a way of life I chose. And I don't know when that was. 15, 16, 18, 20, I don't know, right? But at some point, I slowly started to, as opportunities to find restoration occurred, and I didn't choose them, to that degree, I started to be cooperative in that process. And at some point, you keep stepping into dealing with your pain a certain way, and at some point, you do start to become an adult. You do start to be more cooperative with this fatherless cycle. And so to whatever extent, and again, there's no hard and fast rule for what that is. God knows when that was for you. That's the part that God is looking to you to now own yourself, right? This is how I've cooperated. C.S. Lewis said, when a man is getting better, he understands more and more clearly the evil that's left in him. When a man's getting worse, he understands his own badness less and less. So we need forgiveness. We have to own the places that we've been pretending, the places that we've put on a mask, the places that we've looked to other, as God says, look to other wells. You've looked to other wells, and those wells are empty and they're dry. I said this before, there was no situation or circumstance or family we could have been born into that would have guaranteed an escape from the brokenness surrounding, targeting, and invaded every human heart. There's no perfect family. You were born into the family you were. And so, as important as all those other steps have been, right, of taking us out of the fatherless cycle, waking up to that we need a true father, having those that hurt us own it, forgiving those people, realizing that we now have to face how we've cooperated. Those steps, especially this one, is not a nice to have. We have to realize that our cooperation in that fatherless cycle is also part of the cancer, right? All of this just hasn't happened to us. At some level, at some point, we started cooperating. And that's all also part of the cancer. He, meaning our Father, cannot bless us unless he has us. When we try to keep within us an area that is our own, that we try to keep an area of death. Therefore, in love, he claims it all. There is no bargaining with him. That's a scary statement, right? Because the one thing that we want to hold on to often is our hurt, right? That is one thing. You can let go of so many other things in your life to God. But the one area, I'm convinced, because it's true for me, and I think it's been true for almost everyone I've spoken to, the one area that we truly can call our own is our own hurt. It's the hardest thing to let go of your own hurt. Yet that's what God says, you got to give me your hurt. That's that last prison wall to fall, right? I heard someone say, and I can't remember who it was, they said, I might be in a prison cell, but it's my prison cell. It's mine. I've decorated the walls, right? It's my precious. It is. Yeah, it is. It is. Because think about it. Your hurt is the one thing that that gives us, me included, right? It gives me a reason to keep control, to treat others how I want to act out however I want. It's my pain. You don't understand my pain, and I can act out of it, right? I can act however I want because I was hurt. Right? As long as I live orbiting around and can hold on to that pain, and I don't give it to God, He can't redeem it, right? He can't turn it into something beautiful. But it also keeps me in control in relationships, right? In how I interact with other people. But God wants that too, right? He wants it all. There's no bargaining. There's no bargaining.